Good morning and welcome to the New York City Campaign Finance Board's public hearing regarding the elections in 2017. The board holds a hearing after each citywide election to receive feedback directly from the public about the effectiveness of our various programs and initiatives. The proposals mentioned here may be incorporated into our post-election report, which will include legislative recommendations to the City Council. The New York City Campaign Finance Board is an independent, nonpartisan city agency that works to improve democracy in New York City. The board's core program is its voluntary public financing program. To be eligible for public funds payments, candidates must meet a two-part fundraising threshold, face opposition on the ballot, and satisfy other requirements specified in the law. Candidates who meet the requirements are eligible to receive public matching funds payments at a rate of $6 for every $1 contributed by a New York City resident. The match applies only to the first $175 that a candidate receives from each individual. New York City's landmark public financing program was established in 1988. It encourages candidates for city offices to raise donations from city residents and diminishes the potential for both actual and perceived corruption in our local elections. Here are some statistics from the 2017 elections related to the campaign finance program. As in past elections, the vast majority of candidates chose to join the program, with 172 of 235 candidates on the ballot opting in. The board paid $17.7 million to 105 candidates who qualified for payments. Total payments declined compared to 2013, a result of incumbents running for re-election to all of the citywide and borough-wide offices and the majority of city council seats. In competitive races, public matching funds played an important role in helping candidates run robust campaigns. Public funds accounted for 46% of all spending reported by candidates in the program. Candidates running at the city council level received more than half of all public funds, with 96 candidates receiving a total of $9.5 million. And matching funds accounted for more than half of total spending in 25 city council races. In addition to the public matching funds program, the city charter gives the board a broad mandate to increase voter registration and civic participation in the 5 boroughs. The board carries out these efforts through its NYC Votes campaign. In the realm of voter registration, NYC Votes helped 7,000 New Yorkers register to vote in the 2017 election cycle, coordinating efforts with over 130 community organizations. This fall, NYC Votes also convened 4 official televised debates in the 2017 mayoral race, 2 debates each for the Democratic primary race and for the general election. More than 785,000 New Yorkers tuned in for these debates, aired by CBS and NY1 and their broadcast partners, with another 170,000 joining to watch online. As it has in every election since 1989, the CFB printed the official NYC Votes voter guide. The print edition was mailed to more than 3 million households before the primary election, and more than 4.5 million were mailed prior to the general election. We also conducted a promotional campaign directing voters to voting.nyc and our online voter guide. These ads were placed on social media, in the transit system, in newspapers, and on television. Thanks to this ad campaign, the online voter guide attracted more than 500,000 unique visitors this fall, triple the number of visits to our online guide in 2013. And finally, NYC Votes placed over 13,000 phone calls and knocked on 1,600 apartment doors to remind people about the upcoming elections. This nonpartisan get out the vote effort would not have been possible without the help of over 240 dedicated volunteers. That is a very broad overview of the work conducted by the CFBE and the impact that the agency's programs had on the 2017 elections. But the purpose of this hearing is to hear from the candidates, the voters, good government groups, and other stakeholders about the impact that the CFB and its programs have had on each of you. We want to hear what we've done well and what we could improve on before the next citywide elections in 2021. With that, we'll now begin to hear testimony from the public, so a few words about how this will work. Our public affairs staff has collected a list of individuals who wish to testify. If you are here to testify, but have not yet corresponded with our public affairs staff members who are standing in the back of the room, please see them as soon as possible about being added to the list. I have the list of those submitting testimony as it stands this morning, and I will call up individuals from the list in groups of 3. We ask that all 3 individuals come forward to take a spot at the table. Each individual will be granted 3 minutes to provide his or her statement. Once everyone in the group has spoken, the board may ask some questions, so please remain seated. Your written testimony may be delivered to our public affairs staff at any point as well. All written testimony submitted will be available on our website, and this hearing will be live streamed and archived on our YouTube channel. Okay, would you like to call up the first group?
So the first group is Michael Malbin, Matt McDermott, and Kelly Scott. I guess, so Katrina's going to indicate your time for you to give you a heads up. I want to, Mr. McDermott, do you want to start? Just so we go this way. No particular signs to that.
Well, great. Good morning. My name is Matthew McDermott, and I'm director at Women Insight Strategies, a full-service research consulting firm based here in New York City. I want to come before you today to discuss the research engagement my firm conducted on behalf of the NYC Campaign Finance Board and NYC Votes ahead of the 2017 citywide election. In my testimony today, I want to briefly walk you through 3 things. 1, why we conducted the research. 2, what we found. And then 3, the impact measured by the subsequent NYC Votes campaign efforts ahead of the election. Let me start off by underlining a value that obviously brings us all here today, and that is just the importance of voting. Voting is perhaps the key indicator of civic engagement and, frankly, of a strong democracy. In particular, voting in citywide elections provides a crucial opportunity for residents to influence how their city operates and how they approach and invest in the issues that matter most to them. But while voter turnout near 60% in New York City during any given presidential election, turnout for local citywide elections is significantly lower. In fact, New York City elections are often missing hundreds of thousands of voters who participate in national elections, but who do not participate in elections for local office. This segment of voters, those who cast ballots in presidential elections but do not participate in local citywide elections, are what we refer to as drop-off voters. So in the fall of 2016, the Campaign Finance Board and NYC Votes enlisted our firm to gain new insights into these drop-off voters to inform its strategy ahead of the 2017 citywide election, including its campaign materials and tools published for voters. The benefit of driving turnout in local citywide elections is clear. Past voting behavior is often one of the best predictors of whether someone will vote in the future, more so, in fact, than that person's own predictions. For context, an analysis that the CFB itself conducted last year found a significant turnout difference in November 2014 between voters who turned out in the previous citywide election and those who did not. For instance, particularly among younger voters, 18 to 24-year-olds who didn't vote in 2013, only 6% voted in 2014. Among those who did vote in the previous citywide election, though, 41% voted in that 2014 midterm election. So with that in mind, the objectives of this research engagement were really threefold. First, to understand trends in local citywide voting and factors that affect turnout, specifically the causes of low voter turnout in citywide election. Secondly, to explore motivations and barriers for voting in citywide elections. And lastly, to assess messaging to promote stronger turnout in these local elections. So for the sake of brevity, there are really three key findings I wanted to highlight today that impacted the communications efforts for the CFB. First is that we found drop-off voters are not necessarily facing a significant access problem when it comes to local elections. What does exist among these voters is a significant information gap. They'll only vote if they feel educated on the issues and on the candidates, and they don't currently feel educated today. Secondly is that these voters aren't apathetic. They have concerns about the issues they care about, particularly securing a stable cost of living, education, the quality of schools, and connecting through communications to these local concerns is really important to calling these voters to action and getting them to turn out to vote. And lastly is just the importance of reminders and triggers and how key those are. Voters really need to and want to be fed information about local elections because often time constraints affect their ability to commit significant time to voting. So the research found that through messaging, particularly speaking to rational outcomes and harnessing the themes of diversity and aspiration was the most impactful communicating to these voters. And ultimately, as you'll see in your testimony, because I'm at time, you'll see that the impact of this Get Out the Vote campaign was fairly significant. And while early, as Mr. Schaefer spoke to, there were some real measurable positive impacts to the campaign ahead of the 2017 election.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Scott?
Sure. So I received amended testimony about 15 minutes ago, so I will be reading from my phone. So apologies. And I will make sure that everyone does receive this updated testimony. So good morning. I'm here today to testify on behalf of the Gail Brewer re-election campaign for borough president. So thank you for allowing us this opportunity to identify some of the issues that we experienced working with the CFB. We appreciate all of the assistance that CFB provides and its willingness to hear about how its systems worked and how they can be improved. So there's just three key areas that we would like to focus on. First, the address verification system, in our experience, was unreliable. It didn't always correctly verify, thank you, a person's address, which created the unnecessary follow-up of address verification forms. The contributor occupation verification system was inaccurate. We had some trouble accepting donations because there wasn't clarity on how much detail was needed for those defining themselves as self-employed on the NYCCityVotes.org portal. The portal didn't give enough explanation and added additional work on the back end for the campaign to verify for the match. Following up with the NYC Votes issues, we found that not only did it not verify the addresses of the contributor or employment information, it also did not verify the names of credit card holders. And it could not differentiate between an individual contributor and a group contributor, which led to needing to get verification notices from our contributors. When downloading the list of contributors who gave online using the CFB interface, the list does not include emails or phone numbers. So to get that list, we had to download a separate list, which created additional work in terms of combining the list with the donations and then the list with the email and phone contact information, so that we could have all of that on one list. And then finally, the portal page does not interface with other commonly used CMS tracking products such as Nation Builder. Other merchant accounts offer ways to tie into CMS systems that use the data to tie in seamlessly with field work. So using the city's portal required that we had to forego the option or do double data entry. And on this last point, there was no option to personalize the donation page, which we felt made it less attractive as a donor portal. So that was all we had. And again, I'll make sure that you receive this via email. I have the previous one in, I have the previous one printed, but I'll make sure to email you this currently amended one. So thank you again.
Mr. Melvin.
Thank you, board members and Ms. LaPresse. Thanks for asking me to testify. To identify myself, I'm a professor of political science at University at Albany. I'm also co-founder and executive director of the Campaign Finance Institute in Washington, which is a nonpartisan think tank committed to the idea that durable policy should be based on fact-based research. I'm going to be summarizing the written testimony. You have the full testimony. For years, CFI has played a leading role nationally for its work on small donors. That work has included a series of pieces focused on New York City. Most recent, published last year, is appended to the full testimony. The main conclusion was that New York City's matching fund program had increased the number, the proportional importance, and importantly, the diversity of small donors to city council candidates. In other words, New York City's program is a success. However, the fact that it worked well for city council through 2013 does not automatically mean that it will do the same forever or for all offices. My full testimony compares 2017 with earlier years, doing a quick and preliminary run through the data. The basic conclusion is that 2017 raises important warning flags. The tables in the full testimony show an increase in the importance of small donors through 2013, but then a noticeable drop for 2017. In fact, when we look at private money alone, the percentages for 2017 were below 1997 when you had a one-for-one match. And frankly, that surprised us. We have to do much more to dissect this, but the preliminary overview says the importance of small donors took a step downward in 2017. Whether it's permanent, who knows? But in particular, there was a noticeable decline for city council incumbents, while the mayoral and other citywide candidates have always depended much less on small donors than city council candidates. After the tables, the full testimony made some recommendations for mayoral and other citywide races. Specifically, I recommended one, that mayoral candidates have to raise qualifying contributions from a dispersed set of city council districts, maybe 20, to maybe reduce the contribution limits for mayor down to where city council is, and maybe increase the matching rate for mayor. In addition to those ideas, after the article was written, we thought the mayor should consider a less radical idea that was put forward by council member Ben Callos that would remove the separate public fund maximum for candidates. In my view, this would be helpful, especially in city council races. However, I also think it would not be strong enough medicine to deal with the mayoral and the citywide races. Finally, I want to make a general point. Public financing is and constitutionally must be a voluntary system. Matching funds do not work directly and spontaneously on voters. Rather, they work by changing the incentives for the people who mobilize the donors, and that's mostly the candidates. Everything depends upon their behavior. New York City's system was remarkably successful, but 2017 raises warning flags. If the incumbents are opting out, or if they're behaving differently, this needs to be taken seriously. You do not want to follow the sad example of the presidential system, which became obsolete after Congress refused to update it and candidates began opting out wholesale. Even so, I would not want to see a rush in immediately with large-scale recommendations that are bigger than Mr. Callos's. New York City's program has set the standard nationally. For that reason, you should be careful. You should be deliberative. But you should not ignore what is happening. City's on a 4-year election cycle. We recommend that you spend the coming year to do serious analysis, and we'd be more than happy to be involved in that. And then have a program ready for 2021, ready for legislative action at this time next year.
So now we'll see if we have any questions from the board members. Well, I'll get the ball rolling. I've got a question for you, Mr. McDermott. The fall off that you describe is a fall off in participation in the general election, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct, yeah.
So one would imagine that one of the causes of that you did not mention is the fact that often, not always, but often in New York City, the election is determined in the primaries. Don't you think that's an important factor?
Yeah, so it's a great point and something we assessed in the research, and it's why the communications efforts for NYC Votes started before the primary, because ultimately, to your point, a lot of these elections without competition are decided at the primary level. And so I think what's important in terms of communications is, even though there aren't necessarily your typical structural issues in New York City when it comes to these drop-off voters, because they voted before, they've been to their precinct, they know how to vote. One of the issues is that they don't know that they have to participate in a primary election, and ultimately that decisions are made then. So I think that's part of the communications effort too, is ultimately we have a system that forces people to vote 2, if not 3 times a year, because ultimately those decisions are made at the primary level.
To deal with this problem, at least in part the motivation to deal with this problem, California instituted a top 2 system. Do you know what the data shows in terms of voter participation in California since the top 2 system has gone into effect?
So it's a great question, and I don't off the top of my head, and obviously sort of advocates and those opposed to top 2 would argue different things. In, sort of first and foremost, it in part may affect partisanship at the general election level, because in a place that has such sort of heavy partisanship sway, you might wind up with 2 candidates of the same party in the general. So to that end, I actually don't know off the top of my head if there's been any research off of California in terms of impact on driving turnout in the primary, if only because it's only been around for maybe 4 years or so. So off the top of my head, I don't actually know.
Yeah, I have a question for Professor Melvin. So I believe that you note that in 2017, there was a significant decline in incumbent participation, partly because of an increase in uncompetitive races. And I'm actually inclined to think that in some cases it's a good thing when a candidate does not have serious competitors and therefore chooses to opt out of public funding because they don't need to campaign.
So 2 points. One, this is preliminary. Yeah. 2, participate. The ones who didn't participate, that went way up as a percentage from last time. I don't know what to make of that, but it's something that you have to look at. It was a significant increase, and maybe it was. No, I just don't know. I'm not going to pretend. The number went up, and it was a substantial increase.
Thank you.
So I have a question, and I don't think there are any easy answers to this one, but this is particularly addressing Mr. McDermott's point about drop-off voters, and particularly about millennials. As we know, millennials are the largest single demographic group in America, but they're also have the lowest turnout in voting. And so what is the remedy for this? In my conversations and my work, I've seen tremendous enthusiasm by millennials for the issues at hand, but the failure to convert that. So is that coming out of a lack of belief in the system of campaign finance and elections? Does it come out of a responsibility of the candidate and media? Or is this a responsibility of education? And I'm going to come back to this question, by the way, across the day, because I think it's incredibly important.
So I'll take it first, and then obviously others can jump in as well. I think there's really 2 points here, and it's a great question, obviously, sort of one that that not only we face here in the city, but nationally. I think there's two things at play. To your exact point, and what we found in the research, these voters aren't apathetic. And to be clear, so when we talk about drop-off voters, sort of the demographics of these folks, they're generally younger voters. They're generally more diverse voters. They're typically a bit less college educated, sort of your typical demographics that you would expect for a drop-off voter universe. And so to your point, they're not apathetic. They actually have issues they care about, and they actually care about those passionately, whether it's education or whether it's transit costs, whatever it might be. The difficulty is in correlating those care-abouts to voting in local elections and the need to communicate the only way you get these issues you care about and that you want to see change is to vote in these local elections. And so structurally, I think this is frankly where the voice of the NYC Votes and their campaign efforts comes into such importance, is because there is no other nonpartisan entity communicating to these people that you have to vote to see the issues you care about affected in any way. And so the ability of a group like NYC Votes to go out there and say, you care about these issues, your voice matters, and so you need to participate in this election because of that, is really important. So I think, structurally, there's, a million different reasons why people don't participate. One of those is lack of competition. I think the NYC Votes campaign efforts sort of put those aside and say, here's what we can focus on and here's what we can help to fix, which is that nobody's talking to these people about why voting matters. And so that's, I think, one of the successes of this campaign writ large was that they went out there, whether it was on bus stops or subway ads or in the voter guide, and said, here's why voting matters. Here's more information about those candidates.
In my personal experience, I think everything you said, and I think just a lot of younger people don't know that there are, especially when it comes to primaries, they just don't know that there's a primary coming up. They don't know who the candidates are. They don't know what they're voting for. So it is partially a communication breakdown of they're either not getting mailers, they're not really looking at the mailers, but they aren't aware that it's happening. And then if they are, they haven't made the connection that it is elections on the local level that have the most direct impact on their day-to-day life. They get a little too caught up in presidential or even congressional, the superstars of whichever party they're in, rather than having that education and that knowledge to know there is an election, this is what it's for, this is who's running, and this is why it matters to you.
Excuse me, I want to make it clear that I'm not speaking based on the Campaign Finance Institute, but I do teach political parties and elections. So this is me.
Thank you.
Once you, the research shows that once you get somebody to vote in a couple of elections, you've really created a habit. The first couple are the hard ones. So that's why young people are one reason why it's harder to get young people in. In particular, and then put on top of that the fact that young people tend to change their addresses more often than other people. Put on top of that the fact that it's really hard for people to register in this state, and in particular to register for a party in time for a primary. This is beyond your jurisdiction, but the registration laws in New York State are probably among the toughest in the country.
May I actually add to that just a personal experience I had this past election? I moved in September, and I changed my address. I updated my address, and I was told I missed the deadline, which I knew that I did, and I would have to vote at my previous polling location. But in November, I went to my previous polling location. It wasn't on the list. Turns out it had gone through in time. So I had to really want it, and I did. So I was running all over Harlem trying to vote. But I think that is a barrier for a lot of people who don't have understanding employers or who just say, like, well, I tried.
Good for you, though.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a very quick question of you, Professor Melvin, just following up on Ms. Otter's point? Is it fair to say that you would be more concerned about non-participation motivated by a desire to exceed the expenditure limits versus non-participation motivated by a desire not to waste public funds? In other words, for races that were non-competitive in the latter case.
I think I would probably agree with that. But the focus of the work was on the fact that people, whether they're not participating or even if they are, but especially not taking public money, are raising maximum contributions from the same sort of donors as non-participants, as state candidates. It's not. If you raise your money from max donors, with $5,000 donors to the mayor, $2,500 to the city council, those are approximate numbers, you're not going into the neighborhoods to get $50 contributions. And the goal of this is, or ought to be, to increase participation by a diverse set of people who fully represent the city. And that's what you had in city council races. You don't get that if the council members can raise their spending limit, or if they choose to raise their spending limit with maxed out contributions.
Are there any further questions? I want to thank you all for participating. I want to particularly note Professor Malbin's unwillingness to venture opinions where the data is not clear. It's so refreshing to hear that and so rare, even among professors. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Okay, so the next group is Marty Golden, Angela Sisto, and Garrett Bowser. I apologize for any mispronunciations of your names. Okay.
We'll just follow the tradition of starting on my left, your right.
Hello, my name is Mark Gold. I was the treasurer.
Excuse me, Mr. Gold. Can you just press it so it's green? Okay.
Green.
Yeah.
How's that?
That's
Okay.
good. Thank you.
Okay. My name is Marty Golden. I was the treasurer for Richard Bashner's mayoral campaign. It was my first experience working on a political campaign. I'd like to start with a compliment. During the campaign, the CFB staff was always helpful and responsive, no matter how trivial my questions. That kind of support was invaluable in helping the campaign to properly document its efforts as per the campaign finance law. CSmart also made it relatively easy to submit required reports to both the CFB and the New York State Board of Elections. Now for the criticism. I do have some suggestions and criticisms related to the matching funds program and the method used to qualify candidates for the debates. My understanding is that one of the objectives of the matching funds program is to minimize money and its influence in the political process. In its present implementation, campaigns must raise a certain amount of money from a number of contributors before qualifying for matching funds. That requirement is difficult, if not impossible, for a small, citywide campaign to meet and can result in some perverse funding results. In this past cycle's Democratic primary, Mayor de Blasio had his campaign war chest over 60 times the funds of any of his challengers before he received any matching funds. Through the current process, he was able to qualify for matching funds for even more money. On the other side, not one of his challenges was qualified for matching funds. Even before receiving matching funds, he could have easily outspent all of his challengers many times over, so there was really no practical need to give him matching funds. I applaud Mayor de Blasio for using the system to his advantage, but at the same time, I'm saddened from a public policy perspective that he was able to do so. It's not a criticism of him, it's just the system. My suggestion is that the candidate should be able to qualify for matching funds by simply being on the ballot. That will help even out spending in campaigns. My second issue is related to the method used to qualify candidates for the debates, citywide debates. Debates are very important because they are one of the few opportunities voters get to compare candidates side by side. If a candidate is not in the debates, he's not going to be elected. To qualify, candidates, again, need to raise money and spend a certain amount of money. Therefore, we're using fundraising as a proxy for the quality of a candidate. How does that make any sense? How does the fact that a candidate can put together a good fundraising program equate to him being a good mayor or controller? It does not. Instead, we should be encouraging and enabling candidates to present their ideas and philosophies to the public. What better way to do that than to enable all candidates on the ballot again to qualify for debates regardless of funding? In conclusion, fundraising requirements are removed to qualify candidates for matching funds and the debates. If a candidate can get on the ballot, he should be able to participate in both programs. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm supposed to be at work, but I felt very strongly about the comments I want to make, and they're more of it on a personal level on what the experience was for being a treasurer in a campaign in New York City. So I agreed to take on the role of treasurer for a city council candidate that I truly believed in. It was a labor of love, and I was committed to becoming the best treasurer a campaign ever had. I attended CFB's Compliance and C-Smart course early on and repeated the class as we got closer to the campaign. I read and highlighted the CFB handbook and continuously communicated with my liaison on any issues I was unsure of. I even read some of the laws. A little bit about my background. On February 3rd, I will have worked 40 years for a major bank that had gone through multiple mergers. I've been subject to no less than 40 retail bank audits by the various institutions, of which I've always achieved perfect to near perfect results. So needless to say, I felt confident as my role of campaign treasurer. As the campaign got underway, there was no expense that got by me without proper receipts, no contribution made without proper documentation, nobody got paid without a properly completed timesheet, signed contract. Campaign bank account was open not at my institution and monitored by me daily. Every debit had a receipt. Everything was entered into C-Smart daily. I do consider myself a C-Smart expert now. The reason for my testimony today is to inform this panel the enormous amount of work involved in being a campaign treasurer. This became a second full-time job for me and overtook my life. As I received CFB reviews, I was amazed at how petty and arbitrary some of the findings were, while news reported egregious wrongdoings by incumbents, such as maxed out contributions without a contribution card available. The time needed to be treasurer was work enough. Responding to reviews and baseless complaints from angry opponents was another task, all veiled by the loom of fines and maybe criminal charges by the CFB if they seemed appropriate. I fully understand that public funds are at stake and documentation is necessary to maintain the integrity of the process. However, the bottom line is that I am a volunteer, as is the majority of campaign treasurers. Who needs it? Why am I putting my life on the line for this? Why does the board make this mostly volunteer role so overwhelming? I wonder if there's a master plan. Perhaps the only paid treasurers are those of incumbent campaigns. The incumbents are responsible for the laws that bind these policies. Are they making them so daunting as to keep themselves in office? I mean, my message today is a simple one. Unless the board rethinks the magnitude of the role of a volunteer treasurer, there will be even less people willing to take on this role. Perhaps the only ones left will be those who are not qualified and shouldn't be in the role to begin with. And how will that make the CFB look?
Thank you for your commitment. That was pretty awesome. I wasn't actually intending on testifying today, but for some reason, what?
Can you identify yourself? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. My name's Garrett Bowser. I ran for mayor of New York City. I was not on the radar. I didn't get my signatures. In fact, I actually didn't even try to get the signatures once I got involved in the process of how this whole thing was going to end up. Thanks for building the case, by the way. I don't have to do it. The fact that it's the same for all of us. What I would like to suggest is that we don't give money to candidates who make a certain amount of money, who get a certain amount of, this campaign finance matching business. Instead, I would suggest we do a group media buy. Let's, like the month of October, the MTA, let's just say, hey, look, you guys have fucked up everything so far. You're going to make a deal with us. That month is going to be all about the candidates in the local stations. It's about, the local offices there. It's on the subways. It's in the buses. Let's figure out something with Times Square. let's get the link NYC. It's all over the place. Can you imagine a slideshow of different candidates? There's as people are walking by, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And they can click on it. People are finding, that's the biggest frustration, is that people are saying, you know what? I don't know no one's running against de Blasio, or I don't know who to vote for. Like, no one's doing it. And then I'm saying there's tons of people. Like, look at Nicole. She's a Republican, and she's an amazing human being. If you're one, go vote for her. If, there's Mike Tolkien. He's got a smart city program. But anyway, let me just get back to some of these suggestions here. I would really like to pursue at least investigating that, and I would like to be a part of that. I don't know if there's a panel, a committee, an advisory, but I would very much like to keep going with this from moving forward. I'm also would suggest, and I don't know if this is the Board of Elections or if this is you guys, but maybe we should make an exemption for the debates for third parties, because they're not getting the media attention. A lot of them say, you know what, we're not going to cover your election unless you've already been covered. That's completely insane to me. So I think maybe that they should be exempt from the thresholds. And so they can actually be in the debate, not the Republicans or the Democrats. Also, the signatures for independent candidates, we have to get them in the summer. And, when all the interns are gone, the students are gone. So, thank you. 30 seconds left. The Democrats get their signatures first, and then the independents get to go. And they're tired of doing the signatures. People are going on vacation. The interns are, the students, they're on vacations with their families. And the ones who are left in New York City, the economy's so bad here, they have to work. They can't, sorry, I can't remember what your name was, but people don't have time to donate that kind of time without being paid. So that we need to be able to figure that out. And I'm out of time. And I would also, one last suggestion is that whoever the incumbent candidate is, that they have to be required to participate in just more than one or two debates with all the candidates. Maybe we work out a system with the New York City Park, and in each of the 5 boroughs, we do it right in a park where it's centrally located, and people who are walking by can participate. It's not in some building, and you have to RSVP or anything. It's just there. Thank you very much, and thank you for letting me speak today at the last minute.
Thank you all. Do we have questions from members of the board?
I have a question for Ms. Sisto, and thanks to each of you for your testimony. I think, Ms. Sisto, your experience is valuable. You have considerable experience related to audits. Is that correct?
Yes.
So do you have some specific suggestions about how, and you highlighted the importance of auditing the use of public funds, yes? Do you have some specific suggestions about ways that the methodology could be changed or relaxed, but still consistent with audit rigor and precision?
I was going to bring some examples of the contract cards. I was going to bring some examples of the contract cards where the auditor found exceptions, but I didn't, because there were so many. I got to tell you, they're very petty. Somebody might have just, they checked cash and they meant check. And there's a copy of a check. So this is an exception. This requires a letter. And maybe put the wrong date in. So they crossed it out and changed the date. I mean, it's just like almost every contract card has an exception. I mean, this is not a major finding. We're talking maybe a $20 donation. And yet our mayor had somebody that maxed out and there was no contribution card. That was all over the news, and it was let go. So some of this stuff just is not really should be subject of an audit. So the items that should be subject of an audit are major findings. We only used Stripe for our credit card contribution. So if there's a discrepancy, it has nothing to do with our record keeping. I mean, you guys get all the records. Why do I have to reconcile this? We're not using any other credit card system. So this is the kind of stuff that is really, really unnecessary. I understand we need receipts for expenditures, and I have no problem with that. Then of course there were claims on the marketing materials from opponents. Then there were complaints which were unfounded, but I had to respond to them. You know, and if I don't respond to them, I'm going to get fined or go to jail or something. You know, again, who needs it? I'm a volunteer. You know, some of this stuff is really, in my opinion, really unnecessary.
If I told you that some candidates, I'm not discussing your candidate in any way, if I told you that some candidates use falsified and possibly forged contribution cards, would that change your view at all on the need to at least examine these contribution cards with some care and caution?
Yeah, look, I mean, I get there could be forged contribution cards, but when I got my audit, my public funds audit, all the original contribution cards were there for the auditors to view, and I had no exceptions really on my audit. So when you have that first audit and you see original cards and you see these minor items that came up on the review, you say, hey, this looks like a solid campaign. These are small funds. These are small donors. You know, do we have to look at this so carefully? There's got to be a different system. There's got to be some room for a subjective reasoning by the auditor to say, hey, this is not something they should have to respond to. Because don't forget, every single one of those people now, I have to send a letter and I have to get a response back. I didn't want to lose any of their contributions. It's just incredibly daunting, the whole process. And there's got to be, it shouldn't be so time consuming. It should be something you do on the side. We are volunteers. You know, I wasn't Mayor de Blasio's treasurer. I was a city council person. You know, he lost the primary. I was happy to do it for him, but I quite frankly, I don't think I would do it again.
Thank you for that contribution. I hope you'll reconsider your commitment not to do it again. We rely so much on volunteers like you, and your at least first time, hopefully not only time, experience is extremely valuable.
Can you speak louder, please?
Yeah, I will. Thank you for your commitment. Other questions from members of the board?
No, just a final point. To the extent that there are occasionally falsified and possibly forged contribution cards, they are often ones with very small donations. So that is a possible explanation for why.
Well, how about spot checking them and not checking every single one?
We've looked at, as a general audit matter, we've looked at that idea.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we always are trying to make it simpler for the treasurers, and thank you for your ideas about, I mean, that's one of the ideas of, you know, how to figure out what to look for risk to, you know, make sure that the public funds are secure, but again, also not making it too burdensome. So thank you for your assistance.
All right. Thank you all very much. We're going to move on to the next group.
Okay, so the next group is Dan Foreman, Alice Camarda, and Caitlin Shearer.
Right. Once again, we'll start at the left. Alex, go ahead.
Good morning, Chair Schaefer, members of the Campaign Finance Board. I'm going to just highlight parts of my testimony since I know we're limited to 3 minutes.
Just quickly, your name.
My name is Al. During another city election, we felt the election was administered very smoothly overall, and in particular, we wanted to commend the Voter Assistance Advisory Committee years ago when the Charter Revision Commission recommended putting VAC inside the CFB. I think years later, we're now seeing the benefits of that move. The VAC was able to utilize the resources of the board and is continually extending its efforts to engage voters. And I think many of its the campaign that it ran to not only register voters but get voters to actually show up at the polls on election day was part of the reason that the the city reversed the tide in terms of the number of people who voted, if not the percentage. And we saw arguably improved turnout in an election that was not as competitive as in years past. We did want to make some recommendations regarding both voter registration and campaign finance for the board to consider for its annual report it releases after each election. Regarding voter registration, we support the KALOS bill, Intro 508A, that recently passed the City Council, and I know the board is working on administering, and we're thankful for the working group that they've created and look forward to being part of that to ensure that that bill is implemented and that the City Board of Elections receives the digitally signed voter registration forms. On campaign finance, we support the KALOS bill that was introduced last session, Intro 1130A. That bill would raise the public match cap from 55% to 85% and enable candidates to raise more money from small donations. We actually did an analysis with Represent Us, who's here today, looking at council member fundraising and found that council members still raise quite a bit of their money from larger contributions, those that are not matched by the system. Among council members running in 2017, actually 91% of the funds they raised were larger than $175, and even with a threshold of $1,000, 59% of the money they raised was from contributions above that amount. We look forward to working with the board to make that bill acceptable to the board. We know they have concerns about it, and we're committed to seeing through the issues the board has raised. We think there's an opportunity with the district attorneys in New York City. We've seen receptivity from DA Vance's office to imposing campaign finance regulations on his office voluntarily, which he's done. We think they're receptive to permanent change, and we asked the board to look at the city's authority in this area, which we've talked to some lawyers about, and it seems to be something that potentially the city could act upon. We think it's a much harder road politically to go through Albany. We'd like to see the board in its audits of the past election look in particular at contributions from political clubs. Many of them are still not registered as political committees. In many cases, they should be. We've worked with the state board to address this issue as well, and we think the city has authority to also encourage political clubs to register as political committees. Lastly, I know this is a bit outside of the board's jurisdiction. The doing business database, we'd like to work with the board and with Mox to try to improve the integrity of the database. I can tell you that I registered as a lobbyist a year ago now with reInvent Albany. I'm still not in the database. We've raised this issue with them multiple times. We have other employees who have left who actually were in the database during the campaign, during the election season when they should not have been. We also think as a policy matter that clients of lobbyists who are not lobbyists themselves should be included in the doing business database. We found instances in which clients who are spending tens of thousands of dollars on lobbying and are making large campaign contributions because they don't lobby themselves, they're not subject to the lower contributions. And then lastly, we had some recommendations from previous reports the CFB issued that we think are worth making again. Thank you for your time, and hopefully I did that under 3 minutes.
Good morning. My name is Caitlin Scher, and I'm a volunteer member of the leadership team for the New York City chapter of Represent Us, an anti-corruption organization. Represent Us's mission, it's a nationwide organization, but overall its mission is to pass tough anti-corruption laws in cities and states across America and to end the legalized corruption that has come to define modern politics. Thank you for holding this hearing and for allowing me to testify. New York City currently has one of the best public matching systems in America. Currently, up to 55% of a campaign spending can be provided by the city. This is 55% more than many other cities in America. However, despite our progressive system, our elections are still significantly influenced by wealthy donors. Through an analysis completed by Represent Us and reInvent Albany, we found that nearly 90% of current New York City Council members' 2017 campaign funds came from donations over $175. Now, some may not think that $175 is a large contribution, but in the context of everyday New Yorkers' lives, it is. Consider a 2016 study by the Association for Neighborhood Housing and Development. It found that nearly 60% of New Yorkers don't have enough savings to cover 3 months of household expenses. Therefore, it is unlikely that any of these residents are able to donate more than $175, let alone $100 or $50 to a political campaign. This signals that the vast majority of campaign funds are not coming from everyday constituents, but rather from wealthy donors. The influence of big money in New York campaigns is even more alarming when you raise the threshold. Our analysis found that 68% of council members' campaign funds came from donations over $500, and 53% came from donations over $1,000. In order to run a competitive campaign, it is easier for candidates to solicit funds from wealthier donors. Case in point, if a candidate wishes to fund a campaign solely on donations of $20, the candidate would need to convince 10,000 people to pay him or her that amount. It is far easier to convince 100 people to pay $2,000. However, this big money influence in politics may result in policies that do not benefit ordinary voters and subsequently can discourage residents who want to become involved in city politics. And while we cannot say for certain whether large donations impacted candidates' decision in office, the recent corruption trials and investigations in New York do not inspire much confidence. The best way to rectify this imbalance is to increase the available amount of public spending in elections. Doing so would involve more citizens in the political process and relieve candidates of the pressure to solicit donations from those with the deepest pockets. Represent Us supports a stronger public matching system as embodied in the proposed 2016 bill, Introduction 1130A. This bill would increase public financing for New York City elections from 55% to 85%. The new city council is entering its term after another election with low voter turnout and widespread distrust in government institutions. By bolstering its public matching system, the city has an opportunity to boost civic engagement and build greater faith in our elected officials. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify.
Good morning. And this is not my usual voice. My name is Dan Foreman. I lost my voice this morning. I'm the managing editor at WCBS TV. So please bear with me. I'll do the best that I can. So WCBS TV, in partnership with others.
Dan, it might work better if you don't hold it quite so close.
Okay. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll do the best I can. We televised 2 debates, the Democratic primary debate and the general debate, and we were in a position to do others in this past season. I want to say that it's heartening to see on both sides of the table the commitment to surface more candidates in every which way into the process, and we certainly support that. I'll get into a minute how that sometimes runs at odds with what my responsibilities are, but I just wanted to say off the top, I think that's very important. I also want to say a word about working with the Campaign Finance Board. The outreach people that I worked with, I won't name them all, but it was really refreshing. Sometimes we deal with a lot of city agencies, and it isn't always easy. And even in administrative matters. And these folks really made it possible for us to get the job done in some trying circumstances. So I'm going to make 3 points, and then I won't torch you with my voice anymore, which is not usually like this. I think the areas that could use some work or some consideration, excuse me, I'll try some water, is in the candidate participation criteria. I think we were all frustrated by the situations. Some really strange ones cropped up, certainly in the general, where the Republican candidate almost didn't qualify. And as television people, we've promoted something way out in advance. We have to make arrangements, technological arrangements. And so this led to some very strange circumstances because we really wanted to have a debate, even though it was an incumbent with a very large lead in the polls. So I think that I agree with some of the testimony before that something beyond just the financial criteria needs to be worked out. I think this is a good time to have that discussion in the next year or two and come up with some good ideas about what that can be, because you can't just have everybody in the debate. That suggestion isn't going to fly, because if you have everybody in a debate, you're not going to get anything done. So that's one area. And I know this time is short, so if you guys want to question me on that, you can. The 2 other suggestions One is promotion. It also came up earlier. The city has new aspects, technologies to get the word out. I think it's important to use those as well as further social media. And then the third one is one other thing. The television business, believe it or not, is tough. Not everybody is watching as much TV. So there's this idea about simulcasting on the public TV station. I would support that idea if the main debate is on cable, which is not available to everybody for free. But if it's only on a broadcaster that is available to everybody for free over the air, I would like you to look at that because it makes it harder for me to justify to my bosses why it's so important that we commit the money and the resources to do this. Again, we don't want to leave anybody behind, but if we're making it available to them, to put it over here as well, doesn't seem fair.
Great. Okay, opening up now to questions from members of the board. I'll just remark that, Alex, you've got to be the first person in history to complain about not being added to the doing business database. Does anybody have a more serious comment or question?
Yes, I do. For Mr. Foreman. I believe in your written testimony, you had indicated that you had received some pressure from to have some candidates participate. I was wondering if you could tell us where that pressure came from.
It probably wasn't the best selection of wording. That's internally inside of our company.
Okay.
To decide what is going to be appropriate to put on television, and we have to combine first and foremost journalistic aspects, meeting the qualifications that the board has laid out, or the regulations, and also what people are going to watch. I'm not in favor of putting up Bill de Blasio with an empty chair because we don't have anybody else, or putting up an empty chair and no Bill de Blasio. So these are things that we have to look at, but there was no pressure from the outside.
Great, thank you.
I have a very specific question, and thank you for your testimony. I think this is actually addressed at you too. I mean, you added some really important detail to the testimony from Professor Malbin before. And in particular, I found the data point that 60% of New Yorkers don't have enough funds at hand to be able to cover 3 months of rent, to be particularly sobering. So if you were to look at an argument for increasing the threshold of small dollar contributions toward these local races, do you have a sense for what percentage of contributions today come from people who are part of the 60% of New Yorkers?
Reinvent Albany does not have that data.
I'm going to follow your compliment of someone who did not also say that they knew the facts when they did not. So I will say I also do not know those facts.
Okay. Thank you. But it would be interesting to find out what the correlation is, because obviously if the goal is to increase the number of small dollar contributions, it'll also be very interesting to find out what the distribution of those contributions are, and to find out whether it actually represents a much broader distribution, particularly among folks who really desperately need to be represented in the city.
If I can just respond to that. I mean, I think the value of this bill is that it allows candidates to have more options when they raise funds. I think at the beginning of the campaign, they can decide, I'm going to raise more of my money from small dollar contributions and kind of orient their campaign in that direction. Whereas now, and I think particularly with the fact that the first $175 of every contribution is matched, no matter how large or small, it's really a disincentive to raise from small donors. You're more likely to go to large contributors, get the match on the 175, and then also get the overage, than go just to small contributors. So I think both of those things could help, but certainly lifting the public match cap might cause some candidates to just orient their campaign entirely from the beginning to small contributors.
Mr. Foreman, just a quick question following up on Ms. Otter's question. You had some conversations possibly with the staff at the CFB about whom had to be included in debates based on law and regulation. Yes.
Correct.
Beyond that, did you receive any pressure from anyone at the CFB as to whom to include or exclude in a debate?
No, it was actually the opposite, because I would ask for advice and they said, that's not our job. Our job is to lay out for you who's qualified, who isn't, what the rules are.
Thank you. You know, I just want to think about for a minute what you said, because it seems like a really interesting and important issue. Again, to you, Mr. Foreman. How I can see why it would be important to you as a broadcaster, a commercial for-profit business, to have some exclusive ability, rights to this telecast. But how many people really do get Channel 2 over the air, honestly?
Well, only about 10% of our viewers get it over the air. It's very small. But the point is, if you don't have, people get it different ways. If you're on New York 1, you don't get it on satellite. You only get it if you have Spectrum cable. So people get it other ways. We're on all the mediums.
But you have a website.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you could simulcast this on your
and we do. It's on our website.
Okay.
It was on our partner's website.
Okay.
It was all over social media. But at the end of the day, we also have to protect the person that just has a TV or a radio, and that's why we have radio partners and the only radio partners, and get it to those people for free over the air, and that's critical. So we're saying, why put it on another broadcaster, which is what the city station is.
And when you publicize and promote these debates, you make clear these alternative and free ways to access.
We make it, and also we advertise on those mediums so that people know. And that's the importance of having a broad consortium, the broadest possible, you know, in every language and every medium. And now social media is a huge part, obviously, as well. And we all have to be there.
All right. Thank you all very much for your testimony. We'll call the next group.
Okay. Okay. So the next group is Rachel Bloom, Anthony Rivers, and Ben Kalos.
Somebody's missing.
Matt, before we start, since we're not using this microphone, do you want to bring it over there so that all three of our panelists has their own microphone?
You want to go last? Yeah, I thought the order of the table was this way. It's all right. I'll go first. It doesn't matter to me.
Okay.
Okay. My name is Anthony Rivers. I ran for Council District 27. The following testimony is based on my personal experience with the Campaign Finance Board. The concept of public funds is a great idea. I begin my testimony with voicing my displeasure with the process of obtaining public funds. It should be heavily stressed on the importance of not having a single blemish on the contribution card. Our campaign suffered many setbacks due to minor blemishes on individual cards. I think future instruction should emphasize no ink corrections of any kind on any contribution card. I think that's imperative that you put that into your training, because it was not. And like I said, we received many, many setbacks for minor blemishes where maybe just one digit on the date was crossed out and adjusted with an initial, and still it was not accepted. And you have to track these people down, get letters, and then obviously resubmit it. But I'll tell you, the most egregious complaint that I have today may come as a shock to the upper echelon of the Campaign Finance Board, but I'm lodging a complaint of possible corruption within the ranks of your organization. Our campaign submitted all of the qualifying contribution cards to receive a disbursement with statement number 8. When the disbursement was due, we were told we had numerous errors and did not qualify. We, meaning myself and my treasurer, Oscar Bryan, asked and received a meeting with campaign officials, which was our liaison, Samantha Perez, and her supervisor, identified as Jennifer. We were told the error was on the end of campaign finance and it would be corrected. We submitted necessary reports for statement number 9. The next scheduled disbursement was not made. We again paid a visit to campaign finance to inquire as to what happened. We were met and instructed by Jennifer, Samantha Perez's supervisor, the error could not be fixed by campaign finance, and the onus to fix the error was on our campaign. We further questioned her, Jennifer. We were told, quote, "Too bad, public funds are not guaranteed." This is very problematic and troubling to us. Well, what was the error? The error we refer to are documented as DOC1 in your system. This error appears because, according to your system, we uploaded the same documentation for 32 separate contributors. Now, we're not uneducated. My treasurer has an MBA in accounting. So I don't see myself or him, who were the only two who had access to this system, actually doing this on our end. Okay? We believe this was done intentionally to impede our campaign. The incumbent spent 10-to-1 on his campaign compared to ours, almost a total of $250,000. And even with that, we were able to come up with almost 24% of the vote. The saddest thing of all is that our first distribution was not issued until September 1st, 2017, making it almost impossible to get mailers distributed in time for the election. We feel as though if we had had a level playing field with the Campaign Finance Board and that the money would have been distributed in a more timely fashion and these DOC errors would have been corrected, we would have had a much better chance at actually overcoming our incumbent in the election. And we feel this was part of the problem.
Thank you. We will certainly look into what you've said.
Good morning, members of the New York City Campaign Finance Board. My name is Rachel Bloom, and I'm the Director of Public Policy and Programs at Citizens Union. Citizens Union election evaluation focused on the citywide races and select city council contests. Citywide races were only nominally competitive, with incumbents receiving 74% or more of the vote in primaries and general elections. The exception to that is the mayor's general election race, in which he received 66% of the vote. Races for the city council were notably uncompetitive, with 18 uncontested incumbents running in party primaries, 5 of whom were also uncontested in the general election on November 7th. Citizens Union observed that races that included incumbent council members were half as competitive as contests for open seats, with an average of 3 candidates running in the former and an average of 6 candidates running in the latter. In 2017, only 10 city council members were up for open seats, 7 due to term limits. In addition to open seats being more competitive, they also had a higher rate of participation in the matching funds program. Roughly 80% of candidates running for an open seat participated in the matching funds program, compared to 68% of candidates running in races with an incumbent. In those races with no incumbent running, participating candidates received on average $12,000 more in public funds. Note, many participating candidates did not receive any public funds. An analysis of the 2013 city council elections yields similar results. Races for open seats, which were also twice as competitive, had participation rates well above those with an incumbent running. 91% in open seat races, 76% in races with incumbents. The average participating candidate in an open seat received $73,458 in public funds, almost the same average as in 2017, which was $73,333. Compared with $46,419 for the average candidate in a race with an incumbent. These results may have implication for the next municipal election. In 2021, 36 council members will be facing term limits, as will all citywide seats, all citywide as will all citywide seats. If open seats remain twice as competitive as seats with an incumbent running, 2021 races will place a burden on the campaign finance program not seen since 2001, when a similar number of seats were open due to term limits, and since then the public matching funds were raised from 4-to-1 to a 6-to-1 match. Next, we'd like to highlight the CFB-sponsored debates. We were a proud co-sponsor of the mandated campaign finance board debates this past election session, and we ran the ticketing for one mayoral Democratic primary debate, as well as a general election mayoral, public advocate, and comptroller debate. The mayoral primary and general election debate were held in front of a sold-out 500-person crowd at Symphony Space. The audience of the general election mayoral debate was so rowdy that it sparked a New York Times editorial to declare that the loser was any thoughtful New Yorker, and spectators behaved as if they were at a wrestling match. My time is up, so I'm just going to have my quick 3 recommendations for the debates. 1, include language that will require candidates participating in CFB-sponsored debates to disavow disruptive behavior from the audience and pledge to address rowdy supporters during the debate and ask them to immediately stop any troublesome behavior. 2, rather than have community groups and NGOs partner with the media organizations as historically been done, we believe it would potentially behoove the process to select NGOs and community groups separate from the media producers, and they could work collectively throughout the whole debate season to serve as a vehicle for distributing tickets throughout all 5 boroughs, hopefully leading to greater diversity in audience members and filling of venues with members of the general public rather than candidate supporters. And finally, when candidates that have not met the qualifications are invited to participate in CFB-sponsored debates, a statement outlining how that decision was made should be given to the public. Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me today. I'm Councilmember Ben Kalos, representing the 5th Council District. For those at home, you can tweet me at Ben Kalos. You can also follow along. We'll have some presentations. I hope folks in the audience have it. And it's you can find it at benkalos.com/bigmoneyout, where I'm hoping you might even sign the petition to get big money out of city politics. I introduced this legislation in 2016. It had support from 31 of my colleagues and a coalition that included a diverse group of advocates ranging from good government groups to labor to academics to women's organizations to organizations representing low-income communities. And I'm hoping that the Campaign Finance Board will consider including these recommendations in its forthcoming mandatory post-election report. The city has one of the model public finance systems in the country, one that I hope to support and improve upon, including passing the law to no longer match lobbyist bundling, which we were able to do together. For those who don't know, watching at home, the city matches the first $175 of contributions from city residents at a rate of 6-to-1, up to a partial public matching grant of up to 55%. As good as the system is, it has one glaring flaw, which is a funding gap. When you're running for city council, the big dollar gap is only $65,217, but for mayor, it grows to a staggering $2.5 million. In 2013 mayoral race, half the money, $23.9 million, came from contributions of $4,950, the maximum allowed under the law. Candidate for mayor must make a choice on how to raise $7 million, collect 1,408 contributions of $4,950 from individuals with special interest who have given to every other mayoral candidate before, knowing that the first 175 of each contribution might be publicly matched in a payment that will likely be returned. In the past, the entire payment's actually been returned. Rely on a public match of nearly $4 million and do 10 times the work, collecting more than 17,920 contributions of 175 or less to raise $3 million. Or if you come from a community with residents that couldn't contribute $175 and instead needed to run on contributions of $10, that would be 313,605 contributions, which incidentally is more contributions than were given to all candidates in 2013. If we matched every contribution, someone could run for mayor, collecting 5,689 contributions of $175 to raise about $1 million in small dollars, seeing everyone matched at 6-1 to receive $6 million in public funds, having met the nearly $7 million spending limit, ready to run a competitive race. We live in the age of Trump with a president who once said, quote, as a businessman and a very substantial donor to very important people, when you give, they do whatever the hell you want them to do. Statements like these and many well-documented cases of corruption and malfeasance create an appearance of impropriety the campaign on just small dollar contributions of $175, the ability to run a 100% grassroots campaign where a candidate is beholden to no one except the voters will revolutionize city politics and restore confidence in government has been steadily eroding for decades. This legislation has received support from so many groups, from labor to political parties to advocates for low-income communities, for color, political activists, housing advocates, good government groups. The current speaker pledged at a citizens union debate to support this legislation, and the new Governmental Operations Committee Chair Fernando Cabrera was my previous co-prime sponsor. We intend to introduce this on Wednesday with everybody's support, and as 2021 elections kick off with every citywide and borough-wide elected official, as well as 36 council members term limited and seeking higher office, the time is now to pass this important change that will finally close the big dollar gap in our public finance system. I ask you to join me so together we can offer New Yorkers a path to better government. If we truly want a government of, by, and for the people, that government must also be funded by the people. Thank you.
Thank you all. Questions from members of the board?
Mr. Rivers, I just wanted to say we take any allegation of corruption very seriously, and we will follow up. Can I just try to understand a little bit further about that accusation? You're not saying that anyone at the Campaign Finance Board took money?
No,
individually or collectively?
Absolutely not. What I'm saying is, somewhere along the line, us receiving, after meeting the threshold, the funds, somehow, in the system, the information that we put in was not the information that you received or reported to have received. In essence, we had one individual campaign contribution card that was utilized almost 32 times on different contributions that were submitted. So somehow, some way, that information became scrambled in the system. We know we entered it 100% correct, but yet when we came back, when it was time for disbursement, what happened is we were told that there were numerous errors. These came up as DOC ones. Initially, we were told that the campaign board realized that there was a problem in the system and that they would address it. But when we came back after not receiving the next disbursement, we were told, not you, but the campaign board itself was unable to make the corrections necessary, and that the onus of this repair was now on us. Meanwhile, this is another 10 days that have gone by. We did not receive the funds. We did not receive a phone call, a courtesy phone call to instruct us that we should fix this prior to. That was the most disheartening thing.
So some of this was disheartening, inappropriate, unfair, unjust, and unjustified. But that's a little different from corruption. So the other possible corruption I heard from your testimony was that someone at CFB was favoring a candidate, particularly the incumbent. Is that the basis of the corruption charge?
Well, I would say that along the lines, I believe this was intentionally done to stall us out so that we would not receive funds in a timely manner.
Well, we will look into all aspects of that. First, whether an error was committed, and then, whether there was any ill motive with respect to the error. And we will certainly look into those things. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions from members of the board?
Yes, I have a question for Mr. Kallos. So under the current system, candidates often find it difficult to meet the requirements for qualified expenditures, even at the 55% level. So this, of course, your proposal would substantially raise that bar. So why do you think that's preferable to just like reducing the contribution limit, for instance, of $4,950 for mayor? I guess.
Whatever the contribution limit is what elected officials will seek. At this point, you can give more to the mayor of the city of New York than you can give to the president of the United States. Lowering that threshold just makes it a little bit cheaper for those writing those maximum checks under the law. In terms of the qualified expenditures, I think that in my experience, I've spent almost all of my money on qualified expenditures. As the candidate to my left noted, the most important thing you're going to spend your money on is talking to voters, which is usually going to be in the form of several hundreds of thousands of dollars in mail. As you run for citywide, it becomes millions of dollars in mail. Or television ads, as one of the mayoral candidates showed when he first ran in 2013. But in both cases, you're going to be looking at a very large lump sum, and it's going to be a single transaction, or in the case of doing multiple flights of mail, a dozen transactions, but that's going to be the majority of it. And there will still be that 15% set aside that a person has to raise. But at the end of the day, when somebody's running a campaign, you don't want them handing cash out to people to do things that are undocumented. You want everything in the campaign to be a qualified expenditure. And frankly, given a package of legislation that was passed in the city council, some of which I strenuously opposed, more and more items in the 2017 election will be counted as qualified expenditures. And frankly, I'm counting on the campaign finance board to make sure that items such as cars or pool covers, as was one incident in the state level, are not counted as qualified expenditures, even though the law is fairly broad enough to drive a truck through it with the elected official's face on it.
Thank you.
I have a question which may be sort of the flip side of Ms. Dowder's question, and that is your comments really highlighted the mayoral race. But as I look at your proposal, it seems to me the more likely benefit of raising the limit from 55 to 85% is going to be in city council races. Would you agree with that?
I think that the public finance system that the city currently has actually works best at the city council level. I think Professor Malbin's testimony really highlighted that and showed the between how incumbent and new open seat council member candidates raise their money. And I think you see the most small dollars at the council level. It's just that when you look at incumbent fundraising practices, and when you're looking at 5 borough presidents, 2 citywides, and 36 council members who are going to be following those incumbent practices, my huge concern is just the ability to gain access to those full public, those maximum contributions under the law, and the fact that it's almost impossible to run a campaign on small dollars. And at least 41 people, if not 43, will be going to fundraising consultants who will tell them specifically, go get as many big dollars as you can, and don't worry about the public match because you'll get that on the way. I'm a chess player, so en passant, you will get the public match en passant because the first 175 of every check for $4,950 is going to be matched. And I have to tell you, it's going to get worse because we're only going to be increasing the amount of money people can give to mayoral candidates under the law that was previously passed as it increases with the CPI.
Took in all of what you said, but I'm not sure what the answer to my question is as to whether the greater impact is more likely to be on the city council races.
Sure. At the city council level, it creates a system that looks more like a clean money, clean election system, where a candidate running for city council would get 149 people to give them $175, raising $26,000, receive the full public match so that they can be competitive against an incumbent, which was rare in 2017. At the citywide level, I don't know what will happen. I believe folks like me will try to go for those small dollars, and folks for whom it is easier to get the maximum allowed under law will go for the big dollars, and you will see a mix. And I'm hoping that editorial boards and debates will highlight the sources of money to really distinguish candidates. But I don't think it can happen without this bill.
Yeah, I didn't mean to be critical of the bill. I was just trying to figure out its likely impact. And I think you've confirmed my view that since there are examples of city council races where they had raised enough money with the match to go over the 55%, whereas at least so far we haven't really seen that problem at the citywide level. Thank you. Any other questions?
Stop.
Okay, so we have a.
Thank you all very much for your testimony.
Is a changer. Okay. Okay. So the next group is Mark O'Connor, Barry Shapiro, and Carrie Goodman.
Okay. Shall we start on this side? It is now.
Great. I'm Dr. Carrie Goodman. I was a first-time ever candidate for public office running in the 6th Councilmanic District against an incumbent. And I'm actually here as a poster boy for the Campaign Finance Board. There's absolutely no way I would have been able to conduct a campaign against the incumbent. It was not successful. I got rocked. But I would not have had the opportunity to do what I did without the assistance and support of the Campaign Finance Board. There are a lot of problems that I encountered, some of which I've heard from other testimony. But in the main, it was the Campaign Finance Board only that gave me the credibility and the opportunity to conduct my campaign. And I enjoyed it. At the last candidates forum, the incumbent and the third candidate and I were there. And I was struck by how sad and sort of morose they looked when we were discussing these issues. And I just turned to the audience and said, you know what? I've been doing this now. I think my campaign was about 6 months long. And I have really enjoyed it. I'm going to tell you why. First of all, it gave me a chance to be creative. We made up and gave out fortune cookies that when you open it up, say, vote Goodman.
I was wondering what.
Okay. I have brought some for the board. We hired pedicabs so that people could get to the polls environmentally. My campaign came from, and still comes from, a fight to protect Teddy Roosevelt Park, which is threatened by an expansion plan, a museum, natural history. And it became a councilmanic campaign because the council person is the prime sponsor for the money for the expansion to cut down the park and so forth. So this was really like a protest campaign. But I will say this, my campaign liaison person was incredibly quick to get back to me with any questions, any problems I had, and I had lots of them, never having run for office before, and I didn't have a treasurer, so I was doing it. Recommendations I would have. One, there was no debate except for the fact that we convinced Errol Lewis and New York One to put the three of us on TV, but I think that there should be something where matching public funds, getting on the ballot, and requirements to be in a debate with the other candidates are linked, so that if there are 3 disbursements of funds, for example, at the end of the campaign period, then that all the candidates that receive matching funds should be required to participate in that debate. And the other thing I would say is in the training process, timing. I had no idea. I wasn't sure if it was because I was a novice. I'm not terribly technologically sophisticated, but I had no idea the way the time frame was going to impact me. I had, as I said, I'm not a professional politician. I didn't have a consultant to do it, and it just seemed like there was more confusion and hurry up and wait stuff than was necessary. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Good morning, members of the board. My name is Mark O'Connor. I am the Legislative and Legal Director with Transportation Alternatives. For more than 4 decades, Transportation Alternatives has fought to create safe, inclusive, and livable streets in New York City by promoting walking, biking, and public transit and the use of public street space to build local community. In 2017, Transportation Alternatives was proud to arrange the first election debate watch parties at public plazas under the auspices of the New York City Campaign Finance Board. The debates were screened live outdoors, projected onto large projection screens, and featured music by local DJs before each debate, food from local vendors, voter registration, and other civic services. Partnering with the Neighborhood Plaza program and other partners, one event was held in Brooklyn at the Restoration Plaza in Bedford-Stuyvesant, and one in Queens at the 78th Street Plaza in Jackson Heights for the first and the second general election mayoral debates. Our vision was to highlight New York City's plazas and public spaces as vital civic space and to help generate interest in the electoral process and politics among more New Yorkers, to increase voter turnout, and to encourage First Amendment activity and public debate. All of this by making the context for engaging in the debates more engaging and relevant to New Yorkers in a local community setting. At both events, Dominicanos USA provided voter registration services. ID NYC made it possible for attendees to sign up for the ID NYC card, and New Yorkers for Parks shared information about public space in New York City. At the debate watch party in Queens, the New York City Department of Transportation provided live language translation services from English into Spanish, Hindi, and Bangla, with headsets for participants at designated tables. Food was sold by local vendors and the Queens night market. Promotion for both the Brooklyn and the Queens events occurred through flyering in the neighborhoods of the events in both English and Spanish, online via Facebook and Twitter, email via the email distribution list of Transportation Alternatives and our partners, through local blogs and press statements by the New York City Campaign Finance Board. While we were excited to bring these public plaza events into life and to see how many participants enjoyed the experience, turnout was not as high as we hoped at either event, particularly at the second debate watch party in Queens. We believe that this was influenced in part by a mayoral election that was not competitively contested, by Halloween celebrations, and a tragic and fatal vehicular attack on the Hudson River Greenway in Manhattan just the day before the debate. And overall promotion of the events could also have been stronger. We believe that a number of steps will help make any future debate watch parties a great success. I've outlined those in the written testimony, and we're happy to discuss those further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the work that you do.
Hi, I'm Barry Shapiro. I ran a small campaign for council for District 4. Here are my suggestions, and I'm going to add something toward the end, if you'll indulge me, since there's been so much discussion about public matching funds. So I suggest the following: a donation limit of $500 per person or less. The goal would be to diminish the importance of any particular donors such that they have less influence on office holders. 2, raise the collective donation spending limit of small campaigns to at least $3,000. The current limit of $1,000 isn't sufficient to make any small campaign even remotely viable. A $3,000 limit isn't enough of a realistic temptation for malfeasance. In addition, the Campaign Finance Board can always check accounting and receipts of small campaigns at the end of the election cycle. Small campaigns with donation limits of $100 bring a special message to the regular campaigns can't. They're beholden to no one, neither to donors nor to clubs. And I want to underscore the word clubs. That gives them an independence that regular campaigns can't boast. But that factor has no bearing whatsoever if the small campaigns can't spend enough money to get that message through. Number 3, 9 Democrats ran in the council race for my district. That many created confusion for many voters and also turned our debates more into simple statements of positions rather than real point-counterpoint debates. I'd like to now, I realize everybody is in favor of everybody participating and having much expression as possible. However, it's at this point I might mention that several of the candidates who ran in my district wound up spending more than $100 per vote. One in particular who received matching funds wound up spending over $200 per vote. I just don't think that's a good use of public money, and that careful consideration ought to be given about public matching funds. In point of fact, I think that if you use the algorithm that the more you raise, the more you get, is a part of figuring out who gets what. That doesn't strike me as very fair. And I realize this is a complicated issue, but quite frankly, I'm not sure that all of this public matching is a good use of taxpayer money. And I question the validity of doing it, period. So far as people running, I'd like to suggest in the future each candidate be required to get at least 100 petition signatures.
You're out of time.
Yep. Well, other people went over.
Just finish this point.
Okay. Each candidate be required to get at least 100 petition signatures him or herself. 100 isn't so many, but getting them is hard. It might be a good test of interest and commitment if candidates are required to get just 100 signatures themselves rather than asking others or paying others to completely do this work. And lastly, I think it would be great if you guys would prominently, and I underscore the word prominently, advertise the websites of all the candidates and also prominently advertise sites or links to important candidate information, such as how and where voters can peruse donation information. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Questions from members of the board? We're running out of steam here. If not, thank you all for your testimony today.
Okay. So the next panel is Kathleen Springer, Roxanne Delgado, and Christine Parker. Thank you.
Do they have your name in them?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chris.
Are they left over from the campaign?
Qualified expense.
That's like
Could I have it? So I can email it to you? Thank you. Thank you. And the voter guide. $22.
So you're waiting for a document, so why don't we start on this side of the table?
We're starting with me? Okay. Good morning. My name is Christine Parker, and I ran a small grassroots campaign against an incumbent in Brooklyn in the 35th District. I was on the Republican ticket and the first woman of African descent to run on this ticket in, I think, over 30 years.
The microphone works better on the table.
It does? It doesn't work best for my height, though. Okay? So maybe for yourself, but I'm 6 feet and I have a long torso.
Too close, that's all.
Oh, is it really that loud?
Yeah.
How's that? Is that better? Okay, so I'm appreciative, basically, of the process. I had a good experience. It was a hell of a fight. But I think when you get into this space, you do understand what's involved. And if you're really committed to doing it for the right reasons, you're going to have to go through the process. And that's just the reality. Unfortunately, I really do feel that the system is rigged. And it's rigged against small campaigns, and it's also rigged against encouraging open ideas and candidates who perhaps don't have the financial wherewithal that the incumbent may have. The matching fund of 175, I think, in today's times, most people can do 175. I'm not in favor of lowering it. I think that if someone's going to tie into your campaign, they're going to tie into you, and they'll do whatever they possibly can, and I'm appreciative of that. However, I do take issue with the fact that after you submit your documentation to the Campaign Finance Board in the disclosure period, it would often come back in the second or third disclosure period that the documents that you submitted were incorrect, or there was some glitch in the system, and somehow it was not able to know either your contributions in a timely manner, and subsequently, long term, you would find yourself, particularly if you're running against an incumbent, that you no longer qualify when, in fact, 2 disclosures ago, you may have qualified. So I believe that, and as I heard in the testimony earlier, you think that you're going to get a payout, and in fact, you're not. And it does seem like it's corrupt to me. I don't feel like there's enough oversight in the process, particularly for the new candidates. However, I do feel that your representative is the one that we had. Jonathan Ekman was amazing. He knew exactly and understood the process, and he understood the procedures involved. However, when you ask questions, the feedback and turnaround time was slow. And I, in fact, did not get questions, and it was rhetorical. It became a very circular conversation. So it really made me feel like it was rigged. Disbursement of funds, if you have a concern about the disbursement of funds, one moment, ma'am, I understand that I'm supposed to stop. The disbursement of funds, even if you're in the appeal process, is not forthcoming, and I do think that the system is rigged in terms of new candidates having the ability to move forward, particularly since you don't have the experience. And I also am very concerned that incumbents who don't really run races but who have an extensive war chest no longer don't follow the same procedures that what I would say newcomers as myself would follow. I think that the system in certain instances really does need to be overhauled, and I don't think that it allows for the ability for new voices to be part of the process, which is subsequently why we do have the mess that we currently have. Other than that, I had a great time. I certainly would like to get my appeal issue met, and I'd like to be reviewed because I can tell you it's exhausting to be a candidate, but it's even more exhausting when you have, and I don't have a lot of debt, thank God, but I understood that I couldn't raise a lot of money because I was too busy doing so many other things. So I want to thank you for your time. I think the hearing is important. I'm all for what the council member had to say in terms of the overhaul of the legislation, and I'm in agreement with what he proposes. Other than that, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. And of course, your appeal will be treated with all consideration.
Hi. Hello? Hi.
Go.
My name is Roxanne Delgado. I reside in the Bronx. I was a candidate, but I'm an activist. I'm here as an activist. So CFB should not match contributions for any candidate that exceeds 25% more than the total raised by his or her opponent. Total includes contribution not eligible for matching. I'm going to skip this. This reform is important because as we seen last year, there was a large gap in fundraising and public matching. And public matching only widened that gap, which wasted taxpayers' money and put the underdog in the worst position. This reform is important to level the playing field. The incumbent already have unions, door knocking, phone banking, and sending mailings for them. They also have the party bosses who do have influence over our races. And they have name recognition from all their red ribbon cutting and street naming ceremonies. So why waste taxpayers' money on funding the incumbents' race when they already have an advantage over newcomers? Why widen the gap in fundraising by matching when the gap is larger than 25%? This in reality takes away people's choices who don't bother to vote. Why would they watch baby seals get clubbed? When races are not competitive, voter turnout will always be low and our democracy will continue to erode. And then I have the example now that I have time. For example, a person raised $10,000, but his opponent or her opponent raised only $9,000, they'll receive full matching. But if the opponent only raised $1,000, then the person receives zero matching. So it's a level playing field. And my response was that the turnout was greater last year only because of the Constitutional Convention that was on the ballot. It was a hot, passionate issue. And if you permit Republican candidates to participate in the public debate, even though they didn't raise the minimum amount, that courtesy should be extended to Green Party and other third-party members. And also, I was not included in the candidate booklet, but I have no grudges. It's okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for her?
No, we will do all the questions at the end.
Oh, I see. Okay. My name is Kathleen Springer, and I ran as a council person for District 22. And this is how I was represented in the voter guide against the incumbent.
Doesn't look like you.
This is me.
Oh, okay.
Can you give us a page reference?
That is page 18. So before I ran, I was very adamant about making sure that I would be included in the voter guide because I ran as an independent and I entered the race later than you had to if you were in the primary. And I had missed the primary deadline. So I wanted to make sure, because my grandmother and my mother always depended on those voter guides, that I would be in the voter guide and that I would be on the ballot. So when I called up the Board of Elections, they said if I had any questions about the voter guide, I would have to call here, which I did, and I was assured by several people that I would be in the guide. So I presented my petitions 3 days before the deadline. And then I came in, I called up, what do I need to bring? I brought my bank statement, whatever I needed to do. I really didn't want to do more than $1,000. And I'm wondering, if I actually went under $1,000, would who was running unopposed previously, would he have been able to get matching funds of 6 times the amount if I didn't participate? Or no? I felt as though my entering the race enabled him to get 6 times the amount of matching funds. Now, I was told that I missed that deadline. That was the only deadline that I missed. So I asked why? Why is there any such deadline if I'm able to enter the race? So my liaison said, well, we're working on that for next year. Next year is not going to help me. So being limited in that, I really didn't want to do a lot of fundraising, but I was told, well, go ahead and sign up because you never know. You know, I really wanted to do just less than 1,000. And had I known that I would enable my opponent to get 6 times the amount of matching funds, I would have definitely stayed under 1,000 if you see how much I didn't really do any fundraising or anything. So that's one of the things. But I was told I'd be in the ballot, and then they put Kathleen Springer dive in. So actually, this doesn't even say that. This is a different guide. But in any case, I don't know how that happened.
There were 2 guys that came out.
Okay, well, this one is Kathleen Springer dive in, it should have said. It didn't even say independent. So my liaison said, well, your party is dive in. And yet I saw other people in this guide. One was running for borough president, Everly Brown, who was categorized as an independent. The same thing happened on the ballot. Nobody could find me on the ballot, basically, and it didn't even say independent. So that's another thing that I have to take up with the board. However, when I asked my liaison to speak to her supervisor, because I said I should be able to get on the online guide then, I should be able to have my website, I should be able to have a picture. So she said, well, the profile was due, and I looked up in the voter guide. I wasn't given that until after I entered, by the way. You can't even get into this building without a photo ID, and yet people are expected to vote for me. I ran into a lady that I go to church with, and I mean, I don't know her personally. So I asked her, I said, who did you vote for? So she said, well, I voted for the Democrat. She said, but I voted for him on the working party because I would never vote for a Democrat. I'm a Republican. So I said, why didn't you vote for the independent? And she said, because she didn't have her picture in the guide. And it said she failed to submit it on time. So she's a tardy person. So I said, that was me. And she said, that was you? I signed your petition to save Astoria diving pool. I didn't know it was you, which was the whole reason that I ran anyway, because the councilman wouldn't have a meeting with me. And Commissioner Silver told the mayor that the former city councilman and the councilman wanted to have the diving pool Olympic historic diving pool created by Robert Moses paved over, and that the former city councilman donated $65,000 to the mayor's campaign, and all I stood with was a petition. So then when I decided to run, I can't even get my picture. Okay, in the voter guide it says you have to submit everything the day you enter as an independent. So I called up to make sure. I gave my photo ID. I filled out forms, whatever had to be done. I was depending on my liaison. Also, I was never even told that I could do or that I should participate in a debate on TV. No, there's no requirement for that.
Your time is up, and I think we've got it. We will certainly look in to the facts surrounding your omission from the voter.
Well, I'd just like one more thing to say. It said when I did look at the rule eventually that I could submit everything as an independent. And then below it said all candidates must submit before the primary. So you think that that must be that if you're in the primary, that rule applies to you, but not if you're not in the primary. Secondly, it said profile. It said nothing about picture or website. Now, when I did my website, it took me 2 weeks to get it online with Google, so that I was at a really severe disadvantage by you not even putting my website in. He got 500,000 hits the first day. How could I possibly compete with that? I would have to spend $200,000 in order to send it out to 90,000 actively registered voters, and I would have had to pay for that, $40,000 for the mailing alone, and it still wouldn't have been as legitimate as being in the guide.
I understand. I think we've got the substance of your complaint.
So I know somebody who said he's going to sue for misrepresentation to the voters. They didn't really have a fair chance. Who would you vote for based on this? Who?
Okay.
Could I ask?
I think we've got the point.
I'm sorry, Chair, but I know my time has been up for a long time, but I understand her frustration because something like that happened to me, and for some reason I blocked that out. But my other one comment, and I know I'm out of time, is that I think that if we have a treasurer, because I had a treasurer who actually tried to sabotage my race, and in fact, she did some really bad things in addition to stealing from my campaign, and I reported her. And I reported it to the Campaign Finance Board. And what really gets my goat right now is that the audacity for the board to be so stringent with candidates coming into the political space, but there is no, it seems to be no sort of prerequisites for treasurers. Outside of taking the class, they don't seem to be monitored, and I'm sure that everyone else has gone through some treasurer horror stories. And so what my concern is, if we make a complaint, if there's a complaint against a treasurer, that in fact the CFB looks at that and doesn't allow that treasurer to go on and commit the same actions with taxpayers' money on another campaign.
Each of those cases will depend on the facts of the particular case as to whether the campaign is always charged with the wrongdoing of a treasurer. I'll open it up to questions from members of the board. There being none, thank you all very much for your testimony.
I'm just sorry, but does that there being no questions means that there is, of course, no concern, if that you've heard a lot of these cases before, because the fact that you have no questions about two things that I think are really serious, the fact that her voter guide issue, which I also echo the sentiment of, and the treasurer issue, in addition to what this young lady on my right said.
No,
what is that?
The absence of questions does not indicate a lack of concern. In several of your cases, you've raised issues which we have not previously heard about, and we obviously have to look into the facts, and that's what we plan to do. Thank you.
Some of your testimony was clear enough that it may not have required some of the clarification that was embodied in some of our previous questions.
Will we get feedback from this? In fact, this hearing, will there be anywhere that we can go as prior candidates online, perhaps, to find out, in fact, what the follow-up has been? Or is it going to go into another black rabbit hole?
Well, the board will issue a report which will include certain portions of the testimony that would be appropriate in the report. I gather from what you said that you have an appeal pending, and so there obviously will be, you'll get some feedback in connection with that appeal. Thank you.
I just was concerned because I saw this voter guide that has Kenneth Winder. It doesn't even have my name. So was I eliminated from half of the voter guides that went out as well, in addition to the one with my name? What is that?
I can't answer that question, but I suggest
It may be by mistake in the primary guide.
Yes, that may be the wrong document.
one.
But you can take it up with the staff in the room at the
Would the CFP
close
at
of the
least
hearing.
advocate that you don't fund encumbrance to widen the gap to over 75%? Because that's a waste of taxpayer money. It's an unfair advantage.
We've heard
and I
your
don't agree with
suggestion.
Councilmember Callos. They want more money. I mean, they need to raise their own money. It's
Okay.
not fair.
We have that point. Thank you very much.
You.
Oh, yeah,
people
and the
to
matching
testify?
funds. If he should not have been eligible if I raised less than a certain amount.
No, I've got that point.
Thank you.
And everybody, there should be no deadline.
It appears that there are no more members of the public here to testify. And so I will adjourn the public hearing. Thank you all very much for your very helpful participation.
Myself, so he couldn't be here this morning. Hi, Rick.